Okay, we're going to wait for to see if a few more people join us. We are recording and we are live on YouTube. We're just going to give it a few more minutes. Is anyone from staff on the call? I don't see anyone from staff.
Ben is going to be late. He had an overlapping group, but I believe at least one other person from staff will be on.
Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. Good afternoon. Welcome to the Maryland Public Service Commission's Energy Storage Working Group January meeting. Per the agenda that I circulated, we're going to start with Kathy Wennis from MDE. She circulated, well, she sent to me some data, and then I circulated it with the agenda, so everyone should have it, but she's going to explain what that is. Kathy, can you go ahead, please?
Yeah, hi, can you hear me? Yes, okay, good. I just saw a thumbs up. Okay, what I'm going to do is, since we aren't going to be doing a really complicated, what I love WebEx, where I'm going to share my screen, I'm just going to talk about the data that I was sharing. And the reason I was putting this data together last year, when we were all kind of taking a hiatus from this, is first of all, I report to the Maryland Department of the Environment. And therefore, our focus, because we are the Department of the Environment, is basically the emission rates of everything. What happens when who's running and these types of details. So what I was looking at was a particular day in 2019, and I just wanted to demonstrate that in the original proposal that was submitted on 12/31/2019, I believe we talked about monthly averages. And that may seem suitable, but from an environmental standpoint, we're much more focused almost down to hourly. Usually it's more like a daily, but sometimes we even get down to hourly. So all this data is presenting to you is a fact that emission rates change. That's all it really is. This data is all available from EPA CAMD. There's nothing fancy about it. There's nothing magical. I haven't done equations. I've just done pretty pictures. So all I'm trying to do is just demonstrate that if you use a singular number to say that that's the emission rate, I don't think we're taking advantage of, in fact, what may be happening. In the Maryland Department of the Environment, one of the programs that we're focused on right now is peak emission units. And for those of you who work for utility companies, I would suspect that you're familiar with it. So basically what I'm going to do is just flip through real quick. Going to the Excel spreadsheet and going to the the worksheet labeled Chart 1. It's nothing fancy other than I'm going to tell you, I went back and I started looking at it again this morning, and I have concerns that I might have some errors in this data. First of all, I have the wrong date. I'm really rocking it here. It should have been 7/19/2019. So just looking at the gross load and the CO2 emission rates. And so you're going from a minimum to a maximum and an average. Please understand that I looked at this morning, and I do believe that I have a miscalculation. So we'll just say that it would be a great demonstration, but please don't reference it anywhere else. Then if you were to go to the PDF, the PowerPoints, and if we go to the file labeled 0719-2019, CO2 graph, and again, this is just me putting together data that I downloaded from CAMD, which is the EPA website. Pretty much reiterating what I was just saying and looking at a marginal off-peak emission rate versus an average versus a marginal on-peak. Again, all I'm trying to demonstrate is that if you go to, for instance, the first graph, the emission rate is what it is. I mean, that's what it is when you look at CO2 pounds per megawatt hour. And then if you go to the next graph, it changes. And then if you add like all three of them together, you could see how the emission rate for CO2 would range because they're all at different levels. And my x's, my primary y, my secondary y-axis are always at the same scale. So it's just, again, all I'm doing is showing and sharing the availability of hourly data that's available through the EPA just to demonstrate range in values. That's really all that's about it.
Okay, thank you, Kathy.
I mean, was that adequate? That's really all I wanted to share, is just so that when people think about using an emission rate, it might be worthwhile to consider a smaller time frame than a monthly or a daily or something like that. There are ranges in emissions. This was just one particular day I chose. There's nothing magical about this day. So if people, I would be willing to continue working with people to demonstrate how this data can be accessed so that we can consider this more.
Okay, and I think as I explained to you, there have already been some discussions going on between RAP and Dave Littell and OPC and staff, and Dave will be reaching out to you to bring you into those discussions to talk about some of the issues related to emissions rates that we are not going to go into detail today on.
Okay. Sounds good.
Okay. Thank you, though.
Thank you.
So at the last meeting, I asked the members of the working group to make submissions for suggestions on how we were going to update the metrics. And I received something from staff and something from OPC and something from the utilities, and also Watt Time submitted a model, and those have all been circulated now. What we're going to do, what we tried to do, and when I say we, at my direction, Rapp and also Nitzan Goldberger attempted to take what was submitted and put it into the spreadsheet so that we could discuss it in a more, more readily. And so that was also attached to the email I sent out earlier today as a rough draft. Please understand it's a rough draft, but where we tried to put in the comments that were received where they belonged, because again, so when we go through it, the member of the working group that submitted those comments, feel free to jump in. We're going to start though because we're not going to talk about emissions, we're going to start with deferral or avoided transmission distribution system upgrades, which is item number 2, I believe, on the spreadsheet. And you'll see in column F, the metric measurement, that one of the suggested revisions to this was to better account for round trip. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm on the wrong column. Apologize. Distribution customer savings. The additional detail that was suggested was that we need to know the cost of things being avoided, the amount of time something is expected to be avoided. Was that OPC or staff? Is staff on the call now? Doesn't look like staff. DeAndre, I don't know if that was a comment you were involved in or not.
No, that's not a comment that I was.
So we have to wait for Ben Baker.
Ben said he was going to be a little late today. I think he's having
Okay.
business, but he'll be in. He could probably speak.
It was also suggested that the utilities track all project CAPEX and OPEX and any distribution upgrades on the circuit feeder of the project from 2021 to the end of the pilot, and why the upgrade was needed, and how energy storage drove the upgrade. Some of that is fairly qualitative. We also had the comment, I believe, from staff that what we're measuring needs to be quantitative. The other thing we're going to do, if you look at the third tab of the spreadsheet, data collection, one of staff's comments was that the working group should discuss all of the items that need to be reported pursuant to the statute. So you'll see in the third tab, data collection, Nitzan was kind enough to list them all and put in the statutory reference. Again, this is rough draft, so if you find a typo, let us know. And based again on the comments, you'll see in the comment section, further discussion is needed. I know staff had some comments about costs. Those are the first 3 reporting items. And then if you drop down to project safety, including battery type and chemistry, that was another item where further discussion was required. So we'll talk about all of those as well to the extent we get to them. But one of OPC's comments was that we needed to prioritize. And so that's why we're starting on deferral or avoided transmission distribution system upgrades. Mr. Cleaver, if you could unmute.
Yeah, thank you. I'm sorry, Your Honor. Should I just go ahead and begin, or do you have a question?
Your comments were incorporated. The changes to what was filed last or December 2019 are in orange, and the intent anyway was to capture OPC's comments in column H. And so, tell me if that we didn't, or if we need to.
Did you say column F or H? I'm sorry.
H.
I was looking at F. Let me take a look. Yeah, that's right. That's the OPC column. I'm sorry, I was looking at column F and it didn't seem familiar. That's right. In column H, that sounds like what we said in our memo, and we appreciate the prioritization and focusing on this issue because if you look at the applications, this was where a lot of the value that the utilities claimed this is where it lies, and this has always been an important issue to OPC, and that does appear to capture your column H here in the orange text does appear to capture what we said in our memo.
That the utilities should provide updated information on the planned transmission and distribution upgrades that served as the basis for their calculation. Did you want to comment on that now?
I mean, I don't have anything at this moment to add beyond what we said. Dr. Litundra is here from Synapse. He can answer any questions, or we could perhaps hear the utilities' reaction to it, and then go from there. Whatever your honor sees as appropriate.
Okay, let's see who we can put on the spot. I know Tom Shetty's on the call, but I know counsel's also on the call to represent him. So whoever from the utilities wants to speak. I can choose someone. Mr. Felt, did you unmute yourself to speak?
Yeah, I mean, so I'm having a little trouble tracking. So what is specifically are we reacting to? So are we sharing a document and I'm just not seeing it on the?
Well, you're not seeing it because I didn't share it at my screen, but I sent it around. Did you receive it?
Yeah, I'm just trying. This is the OPC document that we're discussing.
No. What I tried to do was because that seemed a little cumbersome to have everyone's different set of comments. What we tried to do was take those comments and put them into what the working group had worked on and filed in December of 2019, so that it was easier to talk about all the comments where they belonged.
I see.
The issue. So I'm looking at what I sent around. I can share my screen if you'd like.
So are we looking at the attachment A storage value streams metrics file?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I was having some trouble tracking.
No, sorry. I jumped right in, and if you hadn't, maybe not everybody was there. But the document, the black text is basically what was filed in December. And then orange is the comments that were received on the 15th from staff and OPC and the utilities, although the utilities comments were minimal, so that we could discuss it. And so OPC's comment, I started to discuss column F, which is staff's comment, but Ben Baker isn't on the call. So then I went to OPC, which was more of a qualitative, I think, type comment. So that's why it's in H.
Okay, and this is on, okay. So if you give me a second. Also, Steve,
Sure.
You also may be able to speak on this as well. I don't know if Ed Tracy and our team is able to speak.
This is avoided, and we're on avoided T&D, right?
Okay. Do you mind sharing the screen? Is that too much to ask? Yeah, I think that might be helpful. It is
too much to ask, but I'll do it anyway. No, I have a very small screen, so I avoid it when possible, but I will do it. Do you see it?
Okay.
Your Honor, this is Steve Litundra from Synapse. I'm curious, maybe if I could just add a quick comment before the utilities respond.
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah. So the really the context here is as Mr. Cleaver said, it's really wanting to the utilities in their applications suggested that these storage projects would yield deferral values, and they calculated those deferral values, and so. We feel it's incumbent upon the utilities to provide the data and demonstrate that the project actually, the project's deployment actually did result in the deferral that they presented in their applications. So things change over time, loads change and different factors change on the grid, and so I know it's somewhat qualitative, but we're looking to really learn from these experiences and gain insights, and perhaps the deployment didn't achieve what was necessary, or the deferral value, the deferral opportunity was accelerated because of some exogenous variable. And so we're just trying to provide an opportunity to learn from these projects and gain the data and information that would allow us to assess whether what was projected in the applications actually comes to fruition. So hopefully that's
Great.
helpful.
Yep.
Okay.
And I can jump in now. So now I've got myself righted and know where we are. Yeah, I mean, so we saw, I think staff had also made something, had also stated that, the looking to have the ability to track the distribution upgrades. I think this is definitely something that we are open to tracking. I think we just need some guidance on, where does this work in terms of the size of the upgrade? We should probably look at things that are really reflective of load conditions, not necessarily refurbishing or replacing worn out equipment. There probably should be some view of, what's the level of cost that rises to the, to the point. But we understand like, these distribution avoidance and deferrals were a key value stream. And we do understand that that's something that, the commission and that stakeholders are going to want to hear back from us.
Was OPC recommending a certain time? You've noted, Mr. Litundra, that things change over time. A periodic update or just end of the pilot tracking where they look back?
Your Honor, I would say we would be open to the discussion in terms of what would be efficient for the utilities and what would also meet the interest of other stakeholders on this topic. We would see, perhaps a more regular reporting, just again, really depending on as issues arise and meeting the interests of other stakeholders and also being aware of, the utilities and the time and effort that it takes to produce these reports. So I guess, I think at least on an annual basis, I think that would be preferable from our perspective.
Justin, did you have a response to that?
Yeah, I think, there's going to be an annual reporting, I think that's expected as part of this process. So I think if it's part of that annual, I don't see an issue with that. I want to know if anyone on my side, PHI has any further comments. If not, then I can be the last word.
PHI? Okay. So I don't know. I heard what you said, Justin. I don't know if you want to add any language to the comment box or I think everyone understands OPC's comment and we understand the utility's response, but I don't know what we do as far as a submission to the commission.
So, we're happy to put some, this is Justin again. We're happy to put some more content here if that's helpful. I think there should be some guardrails in terms of what needs to be reported and what doesn't. Obviously there's some things that don't need to be part of this calculation, but significant upgrades related to load, I think are definitely something that would be part of the reporting. And if you'd like, we can take pen to paper on that.
That would be great. And I mean, I'm not wedded to this format. This was just the easiest way for me to organize it. So if you want to, have your own column here or however you want to do it, but somehow so it can be incorporated into something that we eventually submit.
Okay. And what's this metric called again? Just, I can't see on your screen and I have too many screens open here.
Yeah. This is deferral or avoidance of utility distribution and transmission.
Gotcha. Thank you.
System upgrades, and then there's a separate line for construction.
Your Honor, if I could put a comment on this?
Sure.
Okay, David Littell with Regulatory Assistance Project, advising the Commission. I would suggest on these deferral issues, I think of them more as a performance criteria or a general target, which means one outcome could be that we have a number of metrics to measure them. Some may be qualitative, as we're thinking about this, just list your work related to load, and I would suggest there, or any other purpose for which the battery pilot is proposed. So if you're doing if you're doing work related to load or to voltage stability or something like that, that would be of interest to know that. So that's qualitative. But I would also then urge OPC and the utilities and all of the parties to think about that metric. Have someone
Hang on a second.
Enter your attendee.
Yeah. In
Hang on a second, Dave. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, we're back. We'll be actually measuring these costs, so think a little bit about the actual metrics and how we'll measure those. So for the deferred distribution system and other upgrades, they'll obviously we'll be trying to reduce those to a dollar figure saved. So things like the year of the investment, when it would happen, and the if you equalize those with the year of the battery investment, that'll be important. Carrying cost and discount rates will be important. And I think it's important to get different thoughts from OPC and the utilities because it's possible they may not be the same. So it would be good to get those on the table for us all to think about.
I agree with David's comment. I understood what Justin Felt said to be that he was actually going to make he was going to propose, I think he said, use the phrase pen to paper. He was going to put, talk to his team and come back with some actual metrics that we could look at, so there could be a common understanding, when the judge makes the submission to the commission. Did I understand that, Justin, correctly? Is that you're going to come back, I guess, with the next set of comments that the judge asks for, in advance of the next meeting to actually do something along the lines of what David just suggested?
Yep. Yeah. So this is Justin. Yeah. So we did commit to looking at this and providing some, revision. I think there was some, in terms of what David just said. In the abstract, do agree with that. We need to talk a little bit about the, all the different cost elements that need to be included, and I mean, like including carrying costs, et cetera, et cetera. Just need to think about that a little bit. I don't know enough about the accounting side of this to say what should and shouldn't be in it. So I guess my take would be, in the abstract, we agree that there should be some reporting of significant upgrades as they compare to what we had proposed, and we're happy to put in some language to further refine that.
Hey, this is Steve. Can you guys hear me at this point?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, sorry, I tried to speak earlier, but for some reason I couldn't get out of mute. I agree with everything that has been said so far. It makes complete sense. The one thing that I would suggest also that we think about is a dollar threshold issue, and that it relates to load, as Justin previously stated. And then also we want to make sure that we confine it to the geographic area that the project is in, right? So, the projects, these are relatively small storage projects, and so it'd be the geographic area that's affected by that storage project from an electric distribution standpoint. All right. So when you think about it, it's not something that's 50 miles away. It's kind of things that are affected specifically by that storage project. So we can Justin's side and BGE and we on the PHI side can work to kind of come up with what we'd recommend as a refinement, kind of to that report out.
Okay, that'd be great. And then circulate that to the working group so that we can talk about it at our next meeting.
Yeah, and sorry, roughly what's the sense of your timing of the next meeting, just to clarify?
I was thinking end of February.
Okay. Yeah.
How's your end of February? I know you have a February 1st filing.
Yeah, I was just hoping that you weren't going to say before February 1st. Right.
Since that's Monday. No, I wasn't.
Yeah, good. Okay. Yeah, that works.
Okay.
That sounds logical, and I think we can get to a point that makes sense on that.
Okay. Anybody have anything else they want to talk about on deferral or avoided transmission and distribution? I think I saw that Ben Baker joined the call.
I did. I just joined. My apologies for being a bit late.
Did you understand? I don't know where you came in. I don't know if you...
on the very back half of this. So it sounds like some metrics were discussed, and it sounds like the utilities are going to go back and bring some proposals for the work group on what will be reported on deferral and avoidance.
Yes. Okay,
so basically we just wait and see what they do to respond to this.
I think so.
Okay.
I think it would be pretty tough for the working group to get much farther.
Right. Yeah, that's what I was wondering. Okay, perfect. Thanks.
So the next thing that there were comments on was optionality. And I think it was an additional suggestion from staff to track how load forecasts change over time and how the projection of optionality changes. And then in column H, some more comments were received, I think, from OPC. The Energy Storage Working Group recommended adopting a method from the New York Storage Roadmap. Ben, do you want to talk about your comments on optionality here?
Sure. Yeah, thank you. So this was, for those who were in the hearing, was one of the, I would argue, the more contentious calculations, and I think that there might have been some issues with understanding of how it was applied. And so when staff reviewed that New York report, we know that the 50% wasn't really a probability of the forecast ever happening. It was an example that they put forward. So it wasn't an either or, it was just here's an example of there's a 50% chance of this occurring and 50% chance of this not occurring. And maybe that's the right approach. But I think when we looked at it, we were thinking this really should be tied more to what's the probability of that future actually occurring and what are the other possible probabilities of that future not occurring. And so I think that would be one place that we would look for improvement here. But I think that's a lot on the evaluation side. So when I think about that improvement, because we've now, the commission has said these projects shall go forth and we will do them. So in terms of tracking if optionality actually, like the value of the optionality, I guess, going forward, be tracking how did the load forecast, which I think is probably going to get caught up in the deferral discussion we were just having, which is how did the load forecast change? Did you have to, how did the scenario change? And that's why I think that optionality and deferral are actually very interrelated in this area, which is how did the situation where you're installing that storage change such that we can value the, I guess, evaluate was optionality an appropriate application. So I guess to me, the tracking metrics for optionality going to the future are going to be how did the load forecast change? How did your circuits and I guess your distribution upgrades change? I guess if there's other experts on the phone that could discuss that, but I guess I break it in two parts. When we're discussing how we're going to evaluate it and whether we should build these or not, I was looking at it from we really need to consider revamping this calculation, but that's not really a concern for tracking. And then for tracking these over the next 10 years and the value of optionality, it's how did the load forecast change? How did the distribution upgrades change? So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Okay. Do either of the utilities want to respond at this point to that?
Hey, this is Steve. Can I ask a clarification on column F? And
sure.
It relates to changes in the load forecast over time. And are you thinking of it as it relates to this particular project location, or that it relates holistically to the entire system? So I'm wondering how you're thinking about that.
I think it's more, I mean, Steve, or you can tell me if I'm wrong on this, or one of the other engineers, but I'm assuming you took your distribution planning process and you said, okay, this, like you have local load forecasts and you probably do some load flow studies to determine if you need to do an upgrade. And so I guess for the local, I would be thinking of it from a localized perspective. So how have your studies in that area changed over time?
Right. And so the accuracy of the forecasts are going to vary all over the place, right, across all of the utility footprint. So any particular location will have, a different forecast accuracy. So there is that to think about.
Yes.
So yeah. So I think what we ought to do is, at least on our side, is take this back and kind of kick it around. And Tom Shetty did a lot of the work in terms of thinking about optionality, but thinking about refinements that we might be able to make in the future and that kind of thing. And Justin, I know you had some thoughts as well. You want to offer that?
Yeah. I mean, I think this is optionality was contentious. You're right, and I think for a lot of reasons. First of all, is that there was no agreed upon methodology in the marketplace for optionality. What we did is we we pulled in what we thought was probably the best example, which was in New York. I think just on an annual reporting basis, I just worry that the incorporation of latest load forecasts, we just have to make sure that we're not trying to try to include too many metrics in here that are going to be too onerous to track, especially with load forecasts, which can be pretty variable. I know that our view of what the load will look like in 10 years is very, there's so much uncertainty, just like any forecast out that long, that I don't know if it's going to provide that much value, at least in the first, number of years when there's going to be most attention to this. So I'm a little bit concerned about having to create a metric for ourselves where we're reevaluating a load forecast 10 years out, which won't have much precision, noting that, and we noted that, by just using the example from New York. And so I'm just worried that, incorporating load forecasts may be pretty onerous given the, how much value it may drive back to the working group. I do agree that looking back at the deferrals and avoidances, the actual investments and how they're, playing out, I think that's very important, to the previous point we were discussing, but I do have concerns on this, but to Steve's point, I'm not going to say an absolute no to it, but, I think we will go back and discuss internally, but I do feel that, this calculation of load might just not rise to the level of something we might want to report on an annual basis.
Yeah. Hey,
Judge
Justin.
Lawrence.
Yeah. Hey, this is Steve. Just one quick thing before you jump in, Tom. Yeah. So the variability. So certainly year over year, we're not going to know a lot, right? This is something that you look over a period of years, right? So reporting this out on an annual basis is probably not going to give you what you want. Tom, you want to say?
No, I just I understand. I think we use the 50% variability, which is the biggest driver for optionality based on that was the middle road. I think, Ben, and for everybody who's listening, I think as we go and look at the load forecast, how it is meeting to the load forecast 1 year from now compared to what we had information when we prepared the modeling, will provide some kind of a basis down the road for what kind of assumption we want to use for the volatility, which is part of the optionality. Instead of 50%, is it 40%? It will provide that insights down the road as we collect more data for the future optionality analysis. Right now, sitting here, I don't know how much, what I can do, because that was 50% was the best information we had in 2020. So the way I look at it is it'll provide us insights, and 2 years from now, we are doing another project. We might have better insights and we might have a different value, which is probably not exactly 50%, Ben. That's where I'm coming right now.
It sounds as though this particular value stream might be something that the utilities look back at the end of the pilot and report on?
If you give me 1 minute, because I think the PUA, I'm trying to remember the site.
Well, if you go to the third tab, did you get the spreadsheet, Ben?
I probably did. My apologies for not having it up.
Do you know what because we have them listed.
Can I ask, and while Ben's looking it up?
Yes.
Or a suggestion. There are two types of load forecasts, and that came up a few minutes ago from the utilities. One is how you would scale your system down to these individual feeders or circuits. And I could be wrong, but from what I'm hearing, and just correct me if I'm wrong, if I'm inferring the wrong things. I mean, that forecast you probably update regularly, and that I would suspect could probably pretty easily be done. There's a separate thing that I think I'm hearing you say, the utilities that you calculating feeder or circuit specific load forecast is a lot of work, and you don't see the value of that every year. But am I right to distinguish those two? And does it help for purposes of reporting to distinguish between those two?
So this is Justin. What was the first point? So the second one is doing the load forecast by the feeder. What was the first point? You said distinguish between the two.
I assume that you do system-wide load forecasts every year, and those, in my experience, those can be scaled to particular circuits. It's not particularly accurate as to the particular circuit, but it gives a sense for how much the overall system load forecast is altering your circuit by circuit load forecast. I don't know if you do that, but I was distinguishing that from from circuit or feeder level load forecast,
Yeah.
which would require some amount of distribution engineering, I assume.
Yeah. So I'm hearing back from our distribution. This is a pretty nuanced topic, so I don't think I can give an answer either way. But I think they looks like they do feeder level forecasting on an annual basis. Is how we do it internally.
And so yeah, so the PUA does have at least two. It looks like maybe 4 optionality discussions.
I see 37, 38, 51. I'm up to 3. I don't know where the 4th one is.
Yeah, I think there's 3. Yeah. So I'm not. So I guess so we'll definitely need to have something there that answers those questions, and I think this is a great group for that discussion. I think where I was coming from, and I appreciate, Steve, how you bifurcated the two, and that's why I was trying to say I think we have 2 different tracks here. I think, and I think this might be where Tom was going. So I view it as we eventually need to relook at the calculation that was used for optionality that was in the report from an evaluation standpoint when we want to improve how we calculate whether we should install additional energy storage in the future. That's probably not a discussion we need to have over the next 2 months unless we're trying to think of what data we can collect to improve that. And to me, that is a very holistic look at your entire load forecast. Like, how good are you at doing local load forecasting and taking all that probability in? But that's probably, you're right, I would not probably expect to collect that data every year. That's probably a save your data, and then maybe in 5 years we all sit down with it and try and figure out what that probability really is. The other optionality, and this is where I was going with the local load forecast and trying to distinguish how this could be different than what you're doing in the deferral section, which is, I do think, I don't think it, I personally, because I know utilities create these forecasts every year, so you're sitting on this data. I don't view it as a burden to provide it, but I think I think the reason you would want to report it is because we have at least 2, if not 3 of the projects we're deriving their benefits from optionality. So it's just simply saying, here's how the load forecast relative to what we gave you originally changed. It's a data point. I'm not viewing it as, it's just tracking and saying, okay, did it play out? Did it not play out? But you wouldn't really use that because optionality is all about probability. So you'd be using a single data point to evaluate probability, which I don't think would be appropriate. So I view it as, okay, you used optionality. Let's see how that plays out. But that's not evaluating the success of optionality, and that we would probably have to do a couple years down the line, and we would have to look into how good are you at doing your local load forecasts. But that doesn't need to be reported every year. I guess to distinguish those 2. But I do know you are sitting on the data, so I guess I don't view it as but I also don't need to see the whole system forecast every year. I agree.
Judge Lawrence, can I interject, please?
Yes.
This is Tom Shetty from Pepco. Ben, I think I think in our case, at least I can speak on the PHI side. There's a data request asking for the load forecast for one of our projects where there was an optionality factor involved. So if I read you correctly, Ben, you are looking at next year periodically providing that same forecast again and again each year so that you can look at the changes. Will that suffice?
I think so. Then that's what I think I'm thinking of.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't think, I would have to look at the PUA to make sure. I think that likely satisfies the PUA requests. So.
Joe, OPC, you all probably might have to think through whether that will suffice for you too, because we had the whole the battery projections when we need it was all based on a load forecast which was available at the time of the modeling, and obviously that forecast will get updated periodically. I don't know the exact whether it's annual or semi-annual, or I do not know that, but as we update it, we can provide that. Will that suffice for you too? I think that's the same question. I'm going to frame it back to you. That will show you how the load forecast has changed and whether it is, our deferral is really making sense there too.
This is Steve from Synapse supporting OPC. I think that sounds good to us. Again, the principle is utilities generated calculations input values into their applications, and we're requesting the data that's going to allow us to evaluate the accuracy of those calculations, and not necessarily, in a punitive, but just in the spirit of learning from these projects, which is the purpose of the pilot project. So it sounds like, I think that annual basis of that would allow us to kind of continue to evaluate the calculations and determine, if these values actually are coming to fruition.
So it sounds as though we have some sort of agreement on what the utility is going to provide. I don't know if I'm back to you, Justin. I know it's not necessarily your area, but when you get back to the working group with the utility combined, I guess, responses to some of these, that will include what we just talked about, right?
Yeah, but let us actually explore that a little bit further internally. This is Steve, because we just want, if we provide data, we want it to be meaningful, right? So just a question of year over year whether that makes sense or whether it needs to be a broader horizon, right?
Okay.
So
Yeah,
I don't know
think,
yeah.
I mean, what the statute says is any value of optionality associated with the amount of time the project is expected to defer the need for an alternative investment. And then 38 is the expected load projection before the project was installed, which should have already been provided, right? No?
We'll internally debate it, discuss, and come back to you, Judge
Okay.
Lawrence. I don't want to, I would
You don't
rather.
want to promise something you're not gonna.
No, I think there's some much more technical issues with that. So I just want to make sure I can speak on behalf of the companies, not as a standalone single person here.
Okay.
Yeah, we just want to make sure the data is meaningful that we would provide, right, over that period. Yeah.
Yeah, but I do know that Tom indicated that with regard to the 50-50,
Yes.
you will have the data to be able to show whether that's a good estimate or whether it should be something else, right?
That will take, my opinion, Judge Lawrence, it will take some time. I don't think so. 1 year is a good 1 year or 2 years, or even the pilot window of 3 years is a good enough time frame to make that call. I think it'll take us probably at least 5-year data or 6 years. We need that. I think where I was alluding, which I'm sorry if I did not articulate it well, where I was alluding was I was referring was in future projects, that's 4 or 5 years from now, we will have better data to say instead of 50%, we would say probably something different, say 40% or 60%. I do not right now. I need little long-term data. That's what I was saying.
But that long-term data will eventually be available in this.
That is right. That will be that is the goal. Is that right? That's a part of this whole pilot and studying how the load forecast is changing, and then come up with that. But I'm not ready to put within 3 years of looking at 3 years data, I can come up with a better number. It's going to be very difficult for me put that in writing.
Okay.
It doesn't make sense. It's not. It's technically not even right to do a long-term basis looking at just 3 years of data, Lawrence.
Tom, I would think that kind of an update, we would have to actually go to data, like it wouldn't even be looking specifically at the storage. We would have to structure how that analysis would be done. And I think if you look at the PUA 216 J and K, we have to do interim and final reports. So maybe if the utilities can talk and figure out if there's something in that time frame is a reasonable time to consider doing this kind of analysis. I'm not sure, but just something to chew on. We'll eventually want to discuss if we're going to have to do these evaluations in the future, how we improve it.
Yeah, you're right, Ben. I think Judge Lawrence, if I give you a simple example, if tomorrow, 1 year from now, the load forecast change, and I put myself still in the 2020 time frame, then the optionality value has also changed. So we can provide at least that kind of information. We we provide. But that's because I have the benefit of hindsight. So we'll have to think through internally how best we can present. As Steve mentioned, it has to be meaningful. It should contribute something, not just for the sake of calculation. So we just need to deliberate a little bit internally.
Okay, and then you'll get back to the working group.
Yes, yes, certainly.
Okay. Okay, Ben, did you have a preference whether we talk about some of the items on tab 3, or we go back to some of the, I guess, less highly prioritized items on tabs 1 or 2?
If we can wrap things up on tabs 1 and 2 quicker, I think, yeah, eventually over the work group, I would just like to cover the information in the 3 tabs, but yeah.
Okay, so then I think we are up to service quality. And the comment was additional metrics suggested measure SARFI 70 before and throughout the deployment of projects. Is that a staff comment?
Yes, I'll let DeAndre speak to that.
Yes, good afternoon. Yeah, engineering staff is proposing that the utilities use SARFI 70 as a measure of service quality, power quality for the energy storage projects.
Okay, does anyone from the utilities have a response to that?
Judge, this is Luke Hasemeyer from BGE.
How are you?
Doing all right. We're concerned that there's not a precedent for use SARFI 70 in Maryland or with the Maryland utilities, and we're curious. And these projects are not operated in a way that they're going to manage, voltage performance. So we're a little confused why the push on obtaining this data.
Staff wants to ensure that we are monitoring the service quality of the projects. Harmonics, power quality we think is an important value or an important metric for us to maintain to ensure that the projects are reliable, and that if there are any functions or mechanical or electrical functions, we want to make sure that they maintain the level of power and power quality in order to fully operate. If there are any, staff is also, we have recommended the use of smart converters, and so we want to make sure we ensure that these connections, that this work remain safe and reliable for state and meet state qualities. We don't have any existing power quality regulations or COMAR for that standards for that much directly, but we would like to find this opportunity to maybe explore that, potentially explore that.
We have the additional concern here that given that there are no existing standards in COMAR, how are we going to evaluate whether or not this is a good measure?
Well, I would refer you back to 7.216 K1 9, and maybe your counsel can answer how the utilities intended to report on whether the project altered the quality or availability of electricity supply. Don't all jump in at once.
Hey, George Lawrence, Dan Herson.
How you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Thanks.
What was the reference again? I'm sorry. I have the statute pulled up here.
7.216 K1 Romanet 9.
A1 Romanet 9. Okay, so this was the this is the 2026 report we're talking about here, right? Which is towards the end of the pilot.
Yeah, I don't mean to say that that's the only place it appears. That's the first place I saw it.
Yeah, I guess I don't know if we have an answer on how we're going to report on ever or give the commission information to report on every metric in here. I will say on this particular one, SARFI, I didn't know what that was. I had not heard of that metric before. I actually had to look it up.
I Googled it.
I didn't know if this was something that, and maybe DeAndre already answered this question. I wasn't sure if this was something that's ever really been reported in any other context by the utility in any regulatory proceeding. So I think our concern is that, and maybe Luke was getting at this, was if we were able to come up with a number, I mean, what are we looking? Are we just looking to see whether that number goes up or down, over the course of time versus when it was first measured? What does that mean? We're a little concerned about throwing out a number there and then somehow being judged about performance on that particular metric when there's not a real appreciation of what the baseline means. So I don't think it's that we're not willing to do things or try to report on the quality of the electricity supply. It's just that we don't have a lot of experience working with that particular metric. And a little concerned about how it would work.
Okay. DeAndre, did you, I think in there somewhere, Mr. Hurston had a question about whether this metric had been used by any other utility in Maryland or any other commission proceeding. Do you have an answer to that?
At the moment, I cannot recollect when it has, but I think I had some knowledge that there was at least one utility in Maryland that uses it. The data isn't necessarily reported to us, but I think it, and I can't speak more to that. But SARFI is regularly practiced throughout the industry, and we're looking at this as an opportunity to explore the potential or the potential that it has in order to provide data to help with maintaining reliability with these projects. Again, these are new projects that we're all learning or wanting to learn how they function, how we move forward with them. And so I feel like this is an opportunity to maybe exercise the use of SARFI. And if the utilities can bring back any information to us in regards to that, then we can definitely have the opportunity to explore more opportunities for that. Any tool we can find that can help us, kind of evaluate these projects right now, I think we should be willing to move forward with.
Okay. Mr. Cleaver, can I ask, does OPC have any position on whether SARFI is something that should be included?
This was not an issue we raised, Your Honor, and we don't take a position on SARFI. I will say, though, that it does. I mean, I think staff has in general raised a good issue on that particular prong of the statute that Your Honor pointed out. What is the measurement by which that compliance with that prong will be measured? It does seem like something that we should try to develop at this point in time, as opposed to some later date. I would add that.
Okay. And I have to say, while I understand your generalized fear, Mr. Hurston, I don't think staff's request is unreasonable, since this is a pilot and we're all supposed to be learning from it, gathering information. Sure, you'll be judged, but I don't think it'll be too harshly. It's a limited context. So I don't find that unreasonable if it's something that you can do. You know, if you feel strongly, maybe it becomes a working group recommendation that the utilities don't join in on, but I'm missing why it wouldn't be reasonable. And I also agree with what Mr. Cleaver said, that we do, you know, I think it might be beyond the scope of the commission's order to a certain extent, but if there are any items that the utilities are going to have to report on, and there's any question in any party's mind about what they're expecting, it's better to probably clear that up through this working group if we can, as opposed to fight about it later. So
yeah, actually, I agree with that. I think Mr. Cleaver's right. I think, you know, if we're going to have to report on something, it's probably a good idea to figure out on the front end what that is and how we're going to do it.
And I was looking to see where this one appeared on data collection. I know Nitsan's on the call now. Maybe she can direct us all to where, if anywhere, K1 Romanet 9 appeared, because it should then end up, well, I don't know. I'm thinking it ends up on the third tab, data collection, even though it's not exactly data, but it's some sort of reporting we have to, the working group's going to discuss and then, you know, make a determination. Nitsan.
Hi, yeah, sorry, I don't, which one is this?
This is in the evaluation of the projects.
Yeah.
No, I'm looking for it. That's why
Okay.
I asked you. But in the statute, in the evaluation of projects, one of the things the utilities have to report on is whether the project altered the quality or availability of electricity supply. And so I'm wondering if we already have that listed on tab 3, or we need to add that.
No, I don't believe I have that on the tab.
Okay. Shame.
I know, I will add it.
Okay. And I think utilities have promised to get back to the working group with a few things now. And maybe this is another thing that they'll get back to the working group with ideas on this. Am I overstating that, Mr. Herson?
No, I was going to say the same thing. I think this is another one we need to noodle on for a little bit. And so why don't we reconvene on this topic? But maybe I could ask DeAndre or somebody at staff if, you know, if they have any information on this metric, or they have any other helpful reference to it that we could have or review. That might be helpful as well, just so we can put it in some context.
K1 the Roman numeral 9.1, whether the project altered the quality or availability.
Well, no, I think he's specifically talking about SARFI 70.
SARFI?
Yeah.
Yeah, we can certainly do that too. Yeah, and Dan, are you looking for how it would be used, or are you looking, I guess, can you help me scope it really quick so when we go back we give you what you're looking for?
Yeah, I'll invite any of my SMEs to weigh in after I talk, but I'm thinking any references to how it has been used in a measurement context before, if there is something like that, how it's been used to measure, to improve, would be helpful. Or if we don't have that, then, you know, just some general information about how that data point is generally used, the context of it, that would be helpful.
So Dan, how it's used basically?
Yeah, how it's used basically, and if there's anything that's been done to use it as a way to measure a particular project's performance, that would be even better.
Got it.
I can get, and I don't know if any of my SMEs have anything to add to that. But I'll give them a chance here. Okay, not hearing anything, so I guess my request.
Sounds like you're on your own.
Guess I'm on my own, yeah.
Very thorough. Yeah. Thanks, Dan. Yeah, we can take that back.
Okay.
Okay, great exchange of information there. Okay.
Well, Judge Lawrence, this is Nitan. Can I just chime in? And I just looked up the statute. So I think that there's a difference in there's the section in the statute that lists the data, and then there's a section, which is what the tab has right now, the data that needs to be collected and made available. And there's a different section that requires the commission to analyze certain things, including the impact on retail supply. And so that isn't necessarily a data point. And I would imagine that if staff feels that there are specific data points that need to be made available in order to complete the report, that would be fair game to be added to the list of data that requires collection through the statute. But I think we would need to talk about whether we think that there are any areas where the requirements for the report aren't captured in the data that's requested by the statute.
Okay, does that mean that maybe, not to have too many tabs, but it's to be more clear, there is a tab that is for items that aren't data collection, but that we're going to address?
We can do that, sure. Or we could do that. We could definitely add a tab, or we can just go through, after we go through the items that have been brought up or are in the statute, we can just go look through what the report requirements are and see if there are any additional data points or pieces of information that need to be reported in order for staff to be able to complete their report as like a secondary.
Yeah, hey, Nathan, Steve, just for clarity on that, you're thinking that we would then have an additional tab, and one of the questions will be whether or not we can measure that particular item, right, as we work through that.
I'm open to anything. I don't have a strong feeling here. I just want to call out the fact that there's the part of the statute that says, here's what needs to be reported from a data collection or from utility reporting. And then there's a different section, K, that says, hey, staff, write this report. And I think it's completely fair game for us to have a conversation now about what needs to be collected in order to write that report. But I think it's just additive to the 47 line items of data collection. And maybe sometimes they're overlapping and sometimes they're not. So we could either just continue and add 48, 49, 50, but I just think we should probably just go through I don't know if we want to have the section I animate the conversation or section K, but I just think we need to be very explicit about which is which as we're talking about it. And it could be separate tabs.
Yeah, and how and just the collection issue that we're going to take back and I'll look at, right, on this one.
Yeah, Steve, I think, I know at least on the K1 not Roman numeral 9, that one was definitely the one when we were looking over, we were kind of scratching our head as to how we're going to measure that. So I think we should definitely discuss all of these at some point, but that one, I think if we need to collect specific data to accomplish that one, I would like us to know what that needs to be so it's happening, because we weren't really sure at this time what that meant or how to do it.
Yeah, fair enough. I think that's a fair discussion to make sure that we've checked all those. Yeah, and decided what we can gather and what we can't gather, and how that'll be inform the process. That makes sense.
Thanks.
Okay. So we'll try to formulate a list so that we can discuss them, I guess. We'll figure out how to format it. So then there were some new potential metrics. Oops, went too far. That were suggested. Customer willingness to pay for part of the project. This might be similar to another. I'm sorry, I'm not sure if this is staff or OPC comment, but go ahead and speak up.
That was probably staff. Let's see. Well, I think this was for DPL, and I think I know we had a couple in the list of questions that there were some, when we were putting it together, we were going through the utilities filings, and there were certain benefits that the utilities had claimed that we were or had stated that could be a benefit, and we just wanted to understand how they were thinking about going, basically to document how they thought they were going to measure that, or if that was maybe not going to be a measurable one, but trying to understand where they were going with it. So I think that was for DPL's virtual power plant.
Right, that was specific to the virtual power plant and getting a sense of what customers would be willing to pay to have a battery installed at their premise, right, for the for the benefits that they receive from the battery, right? And so,
Correct.
yeah, and we had explained previously that we were planning on using market research kind of to gauge that. But I'm wondering what kind of additional information you're thinking about.
I think that, go ahead.
Hey, Ben, I was just going to add, what we tried to do, you see in the first column, which is B here, what staff wrote, and then in F is our attempt to try to turn it into a metric. And I mean, I do think it's fair game because you see it in many areas, kind of the question of how much private investment was leveraged by these investments. So that's the way I thought about this comment, is to the extent you're going in and providing a utility benefit, you could ask the customer or the premises owner to provide information on their own investments, which could be their direct investment in the upgrade, and it could be for something like Elk Neck. It could be for their rewiring behind the meter to, incorporate a battery into particular premises, which, is a level of detail that on first blush, my bet is the utilities don't want to get into. But if you're measuring resilience value, that's in my view pretty important, because explaining to customers that they can hook up a battery to, say, a furnace or boiler or refrigeration on site and a few circuits to let them ride through a storm, rather than just draw down the battery for their whole system. And then, if the customer thinks that makes sense, tracking how much they've invested, those metrics are worth gathering. So that's the thinking that in how we describe these metrics.
Yeah, and so we're just to get into the specifics here. When we talk about this, are we just talking more generally high level about kind of the information that we'll gather, or do we want to talk about those very specific details when you think about it? Because that'll probably evolve somewhat over time as we get more information about kind of the receptivity to these batteries and how customers are using them and that kind of thing, how many outages they've avoided and all of the rest. So do you have a thought there, or is this kind of a high level? We'll be gathering information that indicates the value of these batteries to individual residential customers. I mean, how much detail do you think we need there?
I fill in the details, Steve, because in my experience, if you don't ask for it up front, then you're not, human and institutional nature being what it is, you won't task your people with collecting it, and after the fact,
I mean, 10 years from now, we might be in a different place. Yeah.
So those are just some specifics to illustrate the general principle. I'm not wedded by any of them. I'm just explaining the thinking here and sort of tracking it out into what it might mean for these particular pilots.
Right, and this only is specific to Elk Neck then, this comment?
It would be Elk Neck, but I think the bus depot one would have different, but the same principle would apply, right? Are they going to just use the batteries to back up the whole depot, or are they going to use it for specific purposes and specific circuits if they do end up in an outage situation? I don't know if we...
Right. Okay. All right. So maybe let us think about that a little bit, and then they might reach out to you kind of to kick that around a little bit further before we get to the next edition of this. Okay.
Back to you. That's how I tried to implement your principle, and it may be completely off.
Okay.
So do we need to talk about islanding, or are we same comment?
Islanding was also specific to at least, I think there were 2 Exelon batteries and then both of the PHI batteries, but those haven't been approved yet. I think just thinking about how we're going to measure those, I think, Dave, you said minutes of energy provided to value that loss load. So I guess, are we power? I guess that would make, I can't think of how else you would quantify islanding ability. I would probably leave that to Andre.
And I with a caveat that I'm an attorney who does a lot of energy work, but an attorney by training, I think of islanding as the entire circuit. You have a switch that is flipped when it goes off. So it would be the equivalent of a generator going on to power a whole facility. What I was just addressing was a different type of issue, which is more intensive investment, but is just having the batteries hooked up to particular circuits. So to me, that's different than islanding. And with that, the engineers can tell me I'm wrong.
So,
Go ahead.
yeah, can you comment, David, on which projects you're thinking about this islanding aspect for? Can you identify which battery projects you're including here?
The bus one is unclear to me if it's an islanding project or fits under the category that we just discussed. And so that's probably an implementation thing for it to clarify with the facility. And, I'm sure the facility people will have preferences and thoughts on how to best use that capacity. They may not have them yet. They may have to talk with you in doing it. And the same thing for Elk Neck. Islanding and connection to individual circuits sort of are opposite sides of decisions that are made in implementation.
Right. So clearly Elk Neck has islanding for individual accounts. The bus depot does for the microgrid at the electric bus depot. And then we do have the tentative plan to include the library in Ocean City, right, where there'd be a direct link to the library. So we just let us give that some thought and come back on that one. But none of the other projects likely would have that islanding capability, given the size of the batteries, right, and that scale.
I agree. It is. Yes, I agree. Based off, is Potomac Edison on the line? Because I know they're at least one of their batteries that is I think still under commission consideration. One of its big selling points was going to be its islanding capabilities.
Yeah, this is Brian Mollenschott from Potomac Edison. I guess I would just add for clarification that from an islanding perspective, the Potomac Edison project, that's really the rationale for the energy storage, right? It's not going to be going into island mode under normal operation. It'll be going into island mode when there's, loss of source. So just want to make that, clarification when we're talking about islanding. It'll be islanding by virtue of necessity rather than by choice.
Makes sense. For the library, is there the thing? I have no clue how we would study this, so take it with a grain of salt. But just one of the things I've struggled with in valuing loss of load in an islanding is how you actually quantify the value of the extra couple hours you gave the person with that lights on. And so I'm just trying to figure out, is there a way when it's in islanding mode to survey maybe the library after how it was, I'm just trying to think out loud here. Is there a way that we can basically figure out how they use their time while they were keeping those lights on?
Yeah, fair enough. All right, let us give that some thought. Yeah, it's hard to figure out what the value might be of reading a book, right? But we'll have to give that some thought. Okay.
Thanks.
Yeah.
There's certainly a literature on this being developed, I think, as we're all aware. So, we're not asking you to do a thorough literature review, but welcome any thoughts you have on that, Steve. I've seen.
Okay. Fair enough. But so the Elk Neck, primarily the Elk Neck and the electric bus depot is what you're thinking about on this comment.
It is so far of those projects, and part of it is thinking in your implementation how much you intend to talk with owners about rewiring opportunities and their receptivity to them will influence, I think, what metrics end up maybe providing useful information to us or not.
Yeah, so just FYI, when the batteries are installed at the residential homes, they'll be asked which circuits they want to connect, for example. Right. So we'll know what loads they want to connect to the battery. Obviously, that'll have limited outage reliability addition, right? Depending on the loads that they connect. Yeah.
Okay, do we want to discuss unintentional islanding?
I think that's the Potomac Edison projects, mostly.
Was that Brian?
Yeah, Brian here from Potomac Edison. I guess can you sorry, I'm kind of new to this group, so first time caller.
Welcome.
Yeah, thank you. Can you maybe just explain to me what's meant by unintentional islanding? Are you talking about islanding due to an outage on the Potomac Edison system?
Whoever's comment this is, why don't they speak to this?
Give me that might be from staff's comments, but I don't recall it. So give me a minute.
Sure.
It's Ben from staff's comments.
DeAndre, do you remember? I think this might be an engineering statement.
About unintentional islanding.
Yes.
Well, I think for the so we're asking. I'm sorry. The question is,
What are we asking them to track for unintentional islanding / why?
yeah. We were asking, from what I recall, we were asking them to provide the whether they were the mode that the energy storage system is in at the time of the unintentional islanding, and the reason for the unintentional islanding, which they will probably get. Yeah, I think it was on the lines of what was the state of the project at the time, and what was the reason for the unintentional islanding. Overall, I think that's what we were inquiring, or we wanted to know.
Okay, it was staff's comment on page 1.3b. Unintentional islanding is unplanned and can be caused by the export of power into the grid after it has failed. This can have an effect on project reliability and project safety. I think that's where the comment came from.
Let us take this back, and I'll work with engineering to figure out where we were going with it.
Yeah, the suggestion for some sort of metric was just duration of this unintentional islanding. And then I guess if there's any violations of grid thresholds. Okay. Yeah. Bring that back in the next round.
I mean, I don't know. Is this like something that's, forgive my ignorance, but is this something that's a technical issue, and isn't it handled in the COMAR interconnection rules? Just trying to figure out what we would gain from this from a business model perspective.
DeAndre?
From a business model perspective, the amount of the give me a second here, just as I get my words together. The state of the project at the time has an effect on the cost, or it has some effect on the cost. So knowing which mode, or the grounds for the unintentional islanding, because I believe the cost will vary whether they're islanding or not islanding. The cost of the the intention or the reason for the unintentional islanding will have an effect on that end, on the business end, because I believe the mode in which the project is operating will affect cost or the benefit.
Okay, Ben, did you say that staff would take another look at this and get back?
Yes, we'll do that.
Okay. Next listed is avoided gas generation.
Yeah, so a couple, I think it was, I'm trying to remember which utilities, but a couple of the utilities I think were claiming avoided gas generation. And this might be tied to another one of our things a little later. I definitely know that this might be tied to the noise claim from the DPL projects. And so just trying to understand how we're going to quantify this, and was the DPL statements for private generators, or were there utility owned generators they think that they were in a blackout situation avoiding?
DPL want to respond?
Might also be PE as well.
Yeah, so clarify gas generators. So we had, are you thinking of backup generation is what you're suggesting?
Yes, that's where I would be coming from with that one. That would be avoided backup generation.
Yeah, I mean, so where this comes in most directly, right, is Elk Neck. In Elk Neck, when the batteries are installed, one of the issues is somebody with a backup generator, are they willing to accept a electric battery instead of that? And then the question is, were they considering installing a backup gen set? So those are the types of things we'll have to look at as we get out to recruiting customers and customers join that pilot. Because the original thing that we thought about is that if you have more backup batteries, particularly for residential, you're going to avoid some level of backup generation. And we just need to think about how we might get a handle on that. Because it's not likely that if you already have an existing gas generator, not quite clear whether you would accept a battery in addition to that. So we'll have to kind of take a look at that. So let us give that some thought. I thought it more of a noise noise reduction benefit than really avoided fossil generation, because there's so limited number of hours of outage. But let us give some thought to that.
Yeah, because I, from my own experience, I can tell you that I wouldn't not run our gas generator because you gave me a battery. And so minutes of gas generation displaced isn't really a good measure. It would be if I were in the market to purchase a new one, would I purchase the battery or the generator? And yeah, noise, it is noisy as hell. So that might be a better metric.
Yeah, so it's more of for me, it was more of a noise measurement, because we have a lot of gas generation, for example, where I live in the neighborhood I live in, very noisy in the event of an outage, relatively few hours of operations, but the biggest impact is noise. But it's not likely, it's the one thing that Judge Lawrence just said is likely if you got an electric battery backup, perhaps that avoids then an investment in a gas generating backup unit. So let us give that some consideration. Yeah.
Okay. Steve, are you or someone else taking notes on all the things that you're going to get back to the working group?
Yeah, I've got that. I can come back and kind of mark that up if you'd like.
You know what else is? We are recording. I can make the recording available, and will be on YouTube for future viewing.
In perpetuity. Yeah, there you go.
That's right. Until we actually delete it eventually when the server gets full. But yes, it will be there for a while.
Okay.
Analysis of funds generated from wholesale market.
So when you say analysis, can you clarify?
I think this was something from staff. I think all we were asking, I don't think, now, I guess we had discussed it now. I know that we will eventually have to report. I think my main question was, when you're reporting the information, are we going to be looking at the full money, because I know some of the projects are third party owned, and so they're going to take most of the market savings. But are all of the contracts constructed such that we get to see the income coming, like basically what they earned from the market? So I guess the gross income, and so not the net coming to the ratepayer. So I guess just how we're going to report those streams of dollars from the market revenues.
And does that take us to the data collection tab, Ben?
That probably takes us to one of the 48 on the data collection.
Okay.
My apologies for not having that one memorized.
No, that's fine. I just didn't know if, well, did the utilities have a response then with that explanation?
This is Justin. I'll chime in and say that, in terms of the utility owned, I don't know about the term analysis of funds, but I know the metrics that are proposed there in column F, seem to be data that we would have. Sorry, the data F, yeah, right there. Seem to be something we would report. I think the only question would be, so for instance, in Chesapeake project, that's a project that, the third party is operating in the market, and right now we're in contract negotiations where we may or may not have a component of that revenue stream as a revenue share to the utility. So in any eventuality where that goes, is it expected that a third party owned and operated battery would also report its revenue, or even in the case where there was no revenue share, would that still be needed?
And I think that's where I was going, that is where I was going, was trying to understand what this is really getting to, is what's the data sharing requirements that are going into these contracts with the third parties, because they're going to be earning revenue. I'm not interested in how much they're making as a business. It's just simply a question of what was its operational revenue coming in. So not looking at profits, just revenue coming in from the market and the different market streams. And so obviously if it's utility owned, we have 100% visibility into that. So now it's trying to figure out, are we going to have visibility into that as well for the third party owned and operated, and possibly the third party operated, though I would guess because we're owners, we would still have, or you would still have access to the whole thing.
So I'll speak on behalf of, this is Justin from Chesapeake. I have to look back at the contract and still negotiation. This is definitely something that I imagine from a third party perspective might be a little sensitive, but maybe up for discussion. I have to look back and see to what extent we require that they report. We have language that says they have to report to the commission, but this nuance, that's not something I can commit to, but something I think that's a reasonable question to be asked, and so I can get back to you on that.
Yeah, so hey, this is Steve with PHI. So I believe we'll have all of the data, and as Justin suggested, we'll just subject to check. I think we'll have all that information. And in the case of National Harbor, there's a sharing mechanism, so we'll just double check exactly what we'll be able to provide. Yeah.
Excuse me, Judge Lawrence, Steve, again, representing OPC from Synapse. I just want to note that we also, in our comments, suggested that a data sharing agreement with third-party owners and operators would be important, so that the learning from all of these, that we learn valuable information from all of these projects. So just noting that we had also commented on that issue of sharing.
I don't. Yeah, and that's related to the wholesale market, or more generally, your comment there?
I think it was more generally.
Okay.
Yeah, because I don't see it in the spreadsheet, so maybe it was a general comment that didn't get applied here.
It was in our general principles section of our comments. Thank you.
So the utilities are going to see how they're constrained with regard to data sharing and report back to us. Is that what I understand?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, and this would be the PJM revenue stream that's coming out of the market for each of the storage projects, right? Yep.
Yeah, at least from what staff's comments on this line item was, I guess I definitely would feel more strongly about having optics into the PJM revenue to and from. to what OPC was requesting, Synapse. I think that's interesting. I would have to think about how deep we should be allowed to get into a third party's information for a pilot. So just have to think about what that entails.
Okay.
Yep. I appreciate that. There may be some sensitivity to this that I just, it would help to get that clarification. So we'll report back what we can get from them, at least in terms of the contract and negotiation.
Okay, great. Do we want to talk about costs, Ben?
I love talking about costs. What about them?
I think it was your suggestion under the metric measurement for cost impact to add capital costs, O&M costs through construction, and O&M costs after installation.
Okay, yeah. Let me see if I can find where I put that in my comments. But I think that might actually be in the PUA sections. I think I don't know if this is cost. I think what this is getting to is, I think that was spread out across a couple different sections of the PUA, but anytime we're asked to collect costs, I was just trying to start discussing with the work group what the appropriate scope of that was for the metrics that are going to have to get reported, and is what is meant by total costs in these. Is it just the cost that we're going to charge to the ratepayer? Is that all-in costs that may or may not get passed on? So just trying to understand what all that is and what we're going to get, and then discuss if we agree that that's appropriate.
Yes.
Sorry to interrupt. This is Nissan. I think that the third tab now incorporates most of that. So there's the total cost of the system, and it's broken into battery, balance of system, O&M, and then there's permitting costs and interconnection costs. And I think it was envisioned by the legislation that it would be provided first as an estimate, and then finally a second reporting of what the actual cost came in at. And I welcome any line item additions to that as folks see fit.
I think it's also in the interim report due in July of 2024. Right, Ben?
I'm looking at project costs. So
I think
reduction in system costs. So
I think it's
we'll have to scope those out.
Yeah, I think it's provide estimate once, then interim report. Right? Then interim.
Yeah. I mean, it's in all of the reports, project costs. It's in J and K.
Okay. So do you want to talk about the scope of costs, or is that a discussion that's too lengthy for today?
I think if parties are, I guess, if it'd be good, I guess, maybe just start off with what the utilities were thinking. I mean, straw man thought would be if it was a cost that was used in the, in your analysis as an estimate, then that probably should definitely be in that report. I don't know. Just curious to know what the utilities are thinking here, how they were thinking they were going to comply with those, and what that entailed.
Justin, what were you thinking?
Yeah, I think the way that we reported in the filing, I'm just pulling up the filing now. We did break it out, the cost between capital and O&M. I think we broke it out by contractor, internal labor, materials. So that is the level of cost that we can track to, if I recall. I mean, we were pretty deliberate in how we set that up in our accounting system. So we would be able to break it down. I think that'll allow us to break it down by, the battery, balance of system. I guess the question, there's some kind of dividing line between what's paid to the contractor and what's internal. But I think that roughly battery, balance of system, O&M, I don't see anything here that really, in final project costs, so getting to that 1A, 1B, 1C, and 2, I don't see any issue with that. I think cost details don't strike me as an issue of opposition on our side.
Got it. Thanks. So really, it sounds like, honestly, from what you just described, it kind of goes back to our previous conversation of what is it? If it's on the utility side, we'll be able to see it and look at it, and it won't be an issue. It's just a question of, is there anything further that we would need past that? And I don't think so, but I would have to take that back.
Okay. What about OPC? Did you have a comment on costs or?
Yes, Judge Lawrence, we just were wanting the utilities to report project costs in similar categories so that we can compare across projects. So it's important to have some consistency in the reporting of those categories. So that was in our general comments requesting that cost data be reported in consistent categories across all the projects.
Are you making a suggestion as to those categories?
We hadn't gotten to that level. I think what was just described by the utilities sounds reasonable.
A quick clarification though, for instance, for the Chesapeake project, we are paying a service fee to access that battery that is being third-party financed and operated. So we are not necessarily paying for the battery per se. We are paying for the service that they're providing. So in this context, what I would see is, obviously for like any integration costs on our side and capital costs that we're taking on as part of the integration, but the actual service fee would fall under that O&M estimated costs. So just want to make sure that's clear. That's how we would do this. We may not have visibility.
Is it
in
a
other
lease?
words. No, it's a performance contract.
Okay, because isn't there a separate category in the statute for lease payments?
Number 40, yeah.
Okay.
No, yeah, we're not operating
in the PUA. Yeah.
Yeah, and this is Brian from Potomac Edison. I would just second what Justin just said. Is our Town Hill project is essentially that. It's the exact same as what he described. Is we would have capital costs as far as interconnection on the Potomac Edison system, but then the contract we have with the third party owner operator of the storage is literally just that. It's a service contract with an annual payment. So we don't have any other insight into those costs that the third party is bearing.
Yeah, ditto for the electric bus depot.
Okay.
So you may want to, if it clarifies it, you may want to have a cost stream here for service, like service or performance. Since we would be classifying it as regulatory asset or an O&M, but I think, for clarity for the lay reviewer, they may not see that as an O&M payment per se.
Yeah, and it just might be helpful to break it out separately.
Yeah. So I think that might be, that makes sense.
Go ahead.
I can take a crack at that. I think maybe given that some of the line items are by business model, we can just outline cost requirements by business model and see if folks agree with that.
Sounds good.
Does that finish up our discussion of costs? Okay. We previously had a tab sheet for non-financially quantified, and I believe the comment was, well, there's several comments. There's only a couple on here I think that were truly qualitative. I think they still had some sort of measurement, even if there wasn't a dollar. I know that we're supposed to put a dollar to everything we can put a dollar to. Let's see. OPC recommends that the working group prioritize exploration of quantification methods for this metric, which is, oh, never mind, we're not talking about that. Land use. Comment received was, is there a way to develop a cost estimate? Possible applicability to avoidance deferral of additional utility infrastructure. Is that OPC's comment on land use?
Oh, I think this, Judge Lawrence, this was ours, Steve, for PHI, and so the idea is that in some cases we're avoiding constructing utility facilities, and the idea there is to come up with a value where we could recognize the value of that avoided land use. And so we kicked that around a little bit with RAP to see if we could kind of agree on how that might be measured. So examples that I could give you is avoiding putting in another feeder. In the case of the electric bus depot, deferring the addition of a substation in the case of National Harbor. So if we agree on a method of valuing that avoided land use for whatever period of time, that would be kind of an additional value stream that we could report out. So that's kind of the thinking on that.
Okay, any response from OPC?
We did not prioritize that as a quantifiable benefit, but that sounds reasonable.
Okay, or you'll take a look at what they circulate, I guess, maybe.
Yes.
Does staff have anything to say on land use?
I mean, I guess just question for Steve. Are you thinking in terms of the value of you not develop, like, is that the impact to the like home value around, or is that like by not messing up a green space that's got like a green? Yeah, can you just like I guess go into a little bit more what you were thinking in terms of what is?
Yeah. So right. So that could be the value to the surrounding property owners, although, maybe our facility improvements enhance the value of their surrounding property. But the idea is the preserving kind of that for open space. Is there a way to come up with a reasonable value that we could all agree with? If you avoid constructing a distribution feeder line, or if you avoid building out a substation for a period of time, the fact that you have more open space for that period of time, is there just a value that we could agree to calculate for that, benefit? And so that's kind of the thing I'd like to, kick around further and see if we could agree on how that might be calculated.
Yeah, I mean, we're happy to discuss it. It's definitely going to be a hard one, but I mean, it's not an inappropriate one to kick around and see if we can figure out. I just struggle with it, but I think all of us are, and why we're having this discussion.
Yeah, so. and I think of like in the Washington area, the value of open space is obviously very high, and is there a value to reflect that, right? So just if we can calculate that.
Got it. All right. Thank you.
Okay, under distributed generation hosting capacity, additional metrics suggested: report hosting capacity before and after storage is installed. Staff, I believe.
Yes, got it. Yeah. So I guess staff, because this is one of the ones where we had sent some DRs out during the case to ask about hosting capacity, and some utilities were able to provide. I don't think some did. So I guess I talked to the engineering, and they think that the utilities have the capabilities to measure hosting capacity over time. And so I guess my question to the utilities was, do you agree with that? And then what would be an appropriate way to report that? Because I don't know how, I think we might have some hard time maybe putting together some dollar values around it, but we can definitely figure it out. I mean, California and people are definitely looking at generation hosting capacity. So I guess starting with the bare basics, do you agree that it's something that you have the capability to track today and report just the hosting capacity? Let's just not talk about the dollars for a minute.
So, yeah, Justin, you want to jump in, or?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I know that PHI has hosting capacity maps. So they do track this to a certain extent. I know with BGE, as part of our commitments, we are also developing hosting capacity maps. I'm not an expert on the status of that, but I do recognize that this is something we're going to be providing to the public, and but I don't have a clear path in my mind of what the best is.
Yeah. Hey, so this is Steve. If I could just jump in, we track hosting capacity map changes over time. The one question that I would have is, can we point to the battery as being the cause for the change or not? That's a different matter, right? So there's a number of things that influence changes to the hosting capacity map. The question is the materiality of the battery from having that change. That's a little bit harder to discern.
Yep. Yeah, I think speaking to the technical team, there's some nuance here in terms of how we're doing this. I don't think I have a clear answer on this. I do think calculating the specific effect of the battery may be difficult, but if there's a way to show how hosting capacity changes over time, that might be something, though we wouldn't may have some difficult drawing the line between, those things are affected by a lot of different factors, of which one small aspect may be the storage. So, but we are open to thinking about and trying to see how we meet this requirement. Yeah, so this would be another thing we can add on to things to get back to.
Okay, because OPC also had the same comment here. I don't know if OPC had any recommendations for quantification methods, or just wants the working group to discuss.
Yes, Judge Lawrence, that was the case. We just were, this was identified by some of the utilities in their applications, and we thought that this would be an appropriate venue to discuss approaches to measuring.
Okay, but you don't have any suggestions to?
No, not at this point. No.
Okay, but if you do at some point, you will share them, right? Sure.
Yes, absolutely.
All right. Electric vehicle transportation. Comment was additional possible metric of track minutes or kilowatt hours used to support EV charging. Is this a utility comment? Additional metric added and avoided emissions calculation.
Yeah, so this relates to the electric bus depot. Because our project will assist with electric transit buses, would it be reasonable to calculate avoided emissions and ascribe that some level of that to the placement of the battery at that location? It facilitates the electric transit bus depot. And the question is, what portion of that emissions reduction related to the use of electric transit buses might be appropriate to include as a benefit, right? And so
that's not double counting, because you're counting the bus depot itself, and now you want to count because there's a bus depot, you must have buses. Is that?
No, I don't think it's double counting at all, because you've got electric transit buses that are now able to be placed at that location because the electric demand charges, for example, are less at the location than they otherwise would have been, kind of reducing the cost for putting the buses at that location. In addition, during grid outages, you can still charge the transit buses through the placement of a battery at that location. So it kind of facilitates additional electric transit buses at that location as a result of the battery. And so the question is, there's a reduction in emissions related to electric transit buses. Should we ascribe some portion of that emission reductions to the use of a battery at that facility? And that's kind of the argument. So if you think about a best case scenario, right, a diesel bus compared to a electric bus, or a natural gas bus compared to a electric bus, there's far lower levels of emissions as a result of the use of those buses. So, do you think it reasonable to include a benefit there?
Does OPC think it's reasonable to include a benefit there?
Sorry, Steve again here for Synapse.
That's okay. I wonder if something happened on my end.
You were just getting out of your Tesla, yeah.
We didn't prioritize this, but that, we're certainly willing to evaluate proposals on understanding that potential benefit.
Right. So the thought there going forward, right, is with additional storage, you're going to get a list additional charging station locations potentially added to the distribution system at a lower cost. That's going to facilitate an improvement in the use of electric vehicles, which is going to result in some emissions reductions. Should we ascribe some of those benefits to the battery at the electric bus depot? I would argue that there's a reasonable calculation there, but is it 100%? I don't know that it's that, but it probably makes sense to assign that value at some level to the battery, put it at the location.
Okay, it sounds as though the parties might not need to see that calculation to understand.
Okay. Steve, are you thinking, because I see where you're going, and I mean, I think that whether it ends up being a benefit or a cost, I think we should look at it and how maybe that influences charging of cars off of batteries in the future. I guess because let me back up a little. Are the buses charging off of the storage only and in islanding mode?
Yes, so the way this will work at the electric bus depot, and I know we're running tight on time, but just real quickly, it'll be operating as part of a microgrid. That'll allow the microgrid to operate efficiently. The PV at that site will primarily charge those batteries at that location. So again, you're getting a cleaner fuel source than you otherwise would have gotten off the PJM system. And then allowing those transit buses to go out and kind of serve the community. And so the idea is by placing that battery, you're helping actually facilitate a microgrid at that location that can use cleaner generation sources to basically charge transit buses. So just kind of thinking it up in that way. But happy to kick it around further, and if you guys are open to it, I could come up with a proposed calculation there. See if you guys agree with it.
Yeah, I'm definitely open to it. I think it makes sense. I was where I was going was if the buses are using the storage as the main charge, I think it becomes very de minimis if we're only talking about loss of load situations. But if the battery is facilitating, is what they're charging off of, because it's facilitating that PV system to allow them to charge at night or something without using the grid. At that point, I guess it comes down to how specific we want to get this, and I think that'd be interested in seeing your calculation. Is because I know you're going to have to track hourly emissions. Are you going to have the insight, or is it how hard is it going to be able to say the bus was charging at this point, and here was the state of charge and the average state of emissions inside my battery at the time of charge versus
So I'd step that back a little bit further to think about what the battery is facilitating. But again, that's probably a further discussion than we have time for now. But that's kind of like, I think that having the battery there actually makes the electric transit bus center more likely to actually be able to have 85 transit buses at that location that are all electric, right? Yeah.
Yes, yeah, let's definitely discuss it further. I think that there's merit to it.
Okay.
Okay, so I think we're going to stop there. We'll leave off on economic development for the next discussion.
Can I ask you one question before you jump?
Me?
There was a question on NOx valuation, and so earlier on. So we'll want to go back just to that quick question, not right now, but later as well.
Yes. No, that will definitely be discussed at the next meeting. It's my understanding there's some discussions going on between OPC and staff about some issues, so they can, I guess, come with, and the utilities, with some joint recommendations with respect to the emissions, all the emissions issues. So that's definitely tabled until the next meeting. Speaking of which, does the 25th of February cause anyone heartburn?
Can we do that earlier in the day, not between the times of 1 and 3?
You want to do it in the morning?
That would be I might not have the work group that week, but I typically lead a work group on Thursdays from 1 to 3.
Okay. Yeah, we used to have some people involved in the working group who are on the West Coast, but I think everyone today and now is on the East Coast, so I have no problem with morning. We could do 10 to noon. Does that work?
That would work for me.
Okay. I know there's an awful lot of information that has been promised and is going to be, if not circulated with the entire working group, between different people on the working group, which, let me just say for the record, is perfectly acceptable for the different parties who have the same issue to talk amongst themselves and then bring any resolution or any non-resolution to the working group if discussions offline discussions are helpful, that's great. My job is to keep us on track for being able to file something that's coherent, cogent on before March 31st. So, yeah, go ahead, somebody.
That process, thank you, Judge Lawrence. Since that allows us a full month, I would propose for consideration by the utilities, if it's possible for you to look at what you could do in 2 weeks, roughly, and then that would give our committee and staff an opportunity to review it for 2 weeks, so we could come back to that meeting in a month with both your recommendations and the review of the other parties. And we'll talk to all of you in the interim. We're not cutting off communications, but if we just have the utility response, that meeting will be a lot less fruitful than if we've allowed sort of all the parties to chew over the same issues. Is that reasonable?
Yeah, it sounds reasonable to me. Yeah.
So, okay, does everyone,
just to be clear,
follow that?
Yeah, so it'd be on the, I guess, the 12th, thereabouts, on that Friday.
Yeah.
I think that would be that way. Prefer Fridays in case it has to dip into the weekend a little bit. So that's great that'd be good for us.
Okay, so the utilities will get their information out by the 12th and a lot of exchange of information, and then we'll have an extremely productive meeting on the 25th where we'll, if anybody, by the way, since I did send the spreadsheet to you, additional changes, suggestions to the spreadsheet. I don't know that Excel is the easiest for tracking changes, but if there are changes you think need to be made, I think, not sure where we landed on an additional tab beyond what was in the draft for not data, but other issues we just want to discuss. But we'll try to get that. And if anybody reads through the statute and thinks there's another area that the working group should discuss and come to some sort of agreement, feel free to share that information, at least with me. And yeah, we'll go from there. So then we'll meet again on February 25th, 10 to noon. Does anybody have anything else they need to, they think we need to address right now? I'm not seeing anyone or hearing anyone. Okay, thank you, everyone. I'm going to stop recording now and stop live streaming. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Judge.
Thank you.
Thank you.